until the next riot. Alexei Rashevsky, RT, reporting from Baltimore.
Thanks for sharing your Sunday with us. The Saudi-led coalition faces accusations it used banned weapons during airstrikes on Yemen. Human Rights Watch says there's credible evidence that cluster bombs were dropped on areas close to villages. The report published on the organization's website says the cluster munitions being used are similar to a type made in the U.S. An international treaty banned their use in 2008 because they are particularly dangerous to civilians. In fact, here's what Human Rights Watch has to say about cluster bombs.
A cluster munition attack disperses small bombs, submunitions over a large area, and if there are civilians in that area, they will likely get killed and injured. They often fail to explode, so they become de facto landmines that pose a threat to civilians.
All right, let's discuss this further now with Belkis Vile, who's a Yemen and Kuwait researcher with Human Rights Watch, joining us live here on RT International. Belkis, thanks for coming on this Sunday. Good to see you. Can you just take us briefly through what the report found on the subject of cluster bombs in Yemen?
Thank you so much for having me. Well, first, we at Human Rights Watch gained access to footage that showed parachutes dropping from a coalition airstrike in northern Yemen near the Saudi border. And the parachutes looked very similar to videos we've seen from the company that actually sells these cluster munitions. So immediately we were concerned that there was a chance that the Saudis had used cluster munitions in this war. One can't forget that Saudi Arabia used cluster munitions in 2009 in the same area of Yemen. So we had our concerns that this would be the case again in this war. Then we were contacted by locals, also in the vicinity, 36 kilometers away from where the film was shot, with photographs of the actual munitions on the ground, both exploded and unexploded. So what we did was we had to analyze how we could verify that the film was taken where we believed it to, and that we did with satellite imagery. We were able to match the exact location of where the film was shot. And we know that these cluster munitions could not have been used in the 2009 war and are in fact new because the contract in which the Americans sold these cluster munitions to Saudi Arabia took place in 2013. So this is clearly a new use of cluster munitions in Yemen.
So a new contract, U.S. weapons maker in 2013 selling this type of cluster bomb to Riyadh as Riyadh bombs Yemen. Now, as noted in this report, Saudi Arabia and Yemen didn't sign the treaty that bans cluster bombs. So in effect, they're not doing anything illegal.
Well, under customary international law, there is a clear understanding that cluster munitions are inherently in violation of the laws of war. This is because cluster munitions have no capability, once they land, of distinguishing between combatants and civilians. That is one of the most important tenets of the laws of war, that one has to distinguish between civilians and combatants. Cluster munitions simply let out bomblets in a cluster that can hit at anything in the vicinity.
Well, Belkis, I mean, I'm sorry, you raise a really good point, because it was several days ago, Riyadh did a bombing campaign across Yemen. We saw reports that something to the effect of 3 or 4 dozen civilians were killed, and not a single Houthi rebel was killed. Why would Riyadh choose to use cluster bombs in the first place then?
We do not know why, in this instance, they've used cluster munitions. As I said, they've done it before in 2009. Again, at that time, we had no understanding of why they did this. Locals in the village where the photos were taken of the munitions on the floor said that their suspicion is that the Saudis were trying to bomb a main highway which goes from the city of Saada, which is the Houthi stronghold of the country, southwards in the direction of the capital of Sana'a. That was what they believed was being targeted. We haven't been able to verify that, unfortunately.
All right, Belkis Vile from the Human Rights Watch with the latest on these alleged cluster bombs being used by Saudi Arabia in Yemen. Thank you very much for your time and information today. Thank you. And thank you for your time as well for joining us here on RT International. In the meantime, Saudi-led forces continue their bombing campaigns over Yemen, with Sana'a's only airport being one of the targets. A passenger jet sitting on the runway was hit, reduced to mostly ash and debris. Nobody was on that plane at the time. The attack on the airport reportedly tried to stop an Iranian jet from landing. Tehran said the plane was carrying medical supplies but was forced to turn back from the Yemeni capital. More news coming your way after a very short break.